I'm Sybil Carter, and today I'm talking with President Jimmy Carter. We're in the old historic Plains Inn in Plains, Georgia. The date is Friday, February 21st, 2014, and this is the First Person Project interview number 42. Good morning, Jimmy.
Good morning, Sybil.
Good to see you. I just have a few questions I'd like to ask and hope that we can get some good answers that are going to be interesting. So dig deep and think hard about some of these questions, okay? First one is, can you tell me a little bit about this building that we're in? It's a historic building, and I know that it's undergone a lot of renovation. Can you think of some things that you could tell us about this?
Well, this building was owned by my uncle back in the early 1900s, and he had a big commercial store here, and I worked here every Saturday afternoon. And right where we are now was the undertaker, Mr. Ross Dean. Right. So this is where they used to do the embalming, and also where they used to keep the caskets that they would sell to people for a funeral. And so after my uncle and his son passed away, the Better Hometown Committee of Plains bought this building from the estate, and I was in charge of renovating this building. So we changed it from a grocery store and an embalming place to an inn with a mall, antique mall downstairs. And this room in which we're in is dedicated to the decade of the 1970s. And they have 7 rooms here, plus a commons room, suite, you might say, that we rent out as an antique mall and antique inn. And each of the inn suites is dedicated to a different decade of my life. So we have a 1920s room, a 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And every suite is decorated very accurately and historically properly in the furniture and the surroundings, the decorations and the magazines even of that particular decade. So the 1920s room is all like it was in the 1920s. Oh. And my wife was in charge of decorating the suite. So this is what we're in now, and it's a very good thing for Plains to have this, because we can rent these out, and the inn just about breaks even. It's a very attractive place to stay, and we'd like for anybody that's listening to this program to come and stay at the Plains Inn.
Sure. We invite everybody. Can you think of any other buildings here in Plains that would be what we would consider a historic landmark? Are there some locations around here that you think would be interesting?
Well, Plains is basically frozen pretty much like it was in 1937 when I was a young boy. So the Plains High School is the official Georgia high school. It's a school building, and we have thousands of students from all over Georgia that come to the schoolhouse to learn how people were educated back in the Great Depression years in the 1930s and so forth. Right across the street from us now is Billy's service station, your husband's service station, which was one of the most famous places in America when I was president. That's where Billy and you ran a very good service station. Down the street is where I bought and sold peanuts and gin cotton, sold fertilizer and that sort of thing. And just 100 years, maybe 50 yards from here is the Plains Depot. The Plains Depot was very active, and that's why Plains was originally founded back in the 1880s. And the depot building was used as my national campaign headquarters when I ran for president. Right. So it was kind of the center of the political life of America during the 1976 campaign.
It was. Is it true that Plains actually was founded and was located down at Magnolia Springs and then moved later to this location?
As a matter of fact, there were 3 small communities around here in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And the railroad came through here about 1870. Right. And when the railroad came here, then those 3 communities that were located here and at Botsford and so forth, as you mentioned, they all moved their stores into Plains. Right. So it was founded officially about 1886, I think. Yeah. So Plains is really the conglomeration of 3 different communities.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's let's look at you as a young man or a young boy. What did you do for fun growing up on the farm?
Well, we lived about 2.5 miles west of here in a little community called Archery that was not incorporated. And we had 55 African American families and our family. So all of my workmates in the field, all of my playmates in the yard and in the woods and on the creeks were black kids. And so I grew up in an African American culture, really. And there were lots of things to do. First of all, during the dry season, when we were cultivating crops and planting and cultivating and harvesting, we were extremely busy in the field. And Daddy was a very good taskmaster. He taught me the benefits of hard work. And that was during the Great Depression years, when a grown man who worked from before daybreak until sundown was paid $1 a day. And an able-bodied woman was paid 75 cents. And a young teenage boy that couldn't really have the responsibility of handling mules and horses in the field was paid 50 cents a day. But you could buy a pair of overalls for $1.50 and a pair of shoes for cheap shoes for $1. And a loaf of bread was 5 cents. A very large loaf of bread was 10 cents. Eggs were 1 cent apiece. So you see, you could live very inexpensively. And everybody that lived in that area had their own gardens, and they would go into the woods and get their own stove wood to build fires. We didn't have electricity or running water when I was a young boy. Daddy put in a windmill when I was 11 years old, and then we had running water in a bathroom instead of the outhouse that we had to use. And we got electricity much later. And so we grew up in you might say, a kind of a rural, rudimentary, Great Depression year environment, where hard work was a part of life and where families were very close-knit. My father was a deacon in the church, and he taught Sunday school, so I got my religious education from him. And he also taught me the benefits of obeying orders and also of being willing to work hard when I had to. But so to enjoy myself, we built our own toys, which we used around the farm, and my black playmates and I. And then we spent a lot of time during rainy weather or during lay-by time when we didn't have to work in the field, in the woods, hunting and along the creek banks fishing. And so there was a lot to do. We also played baseball and other games as well. And then when I got big enough to be in high school, I was on the basketball team and also played baseball.
I've heard stories that the troop trains came through Plains, and that you and your sisters could be seen waving to the troops as they went by on the trains. Also, that there was hobos. There were hobos that used to come through hitchhiking, and that your mom was famous for feeding the hobos. Is that true?
That's true. Well, as I said, it was during the Great Depression years, and the unemployment rate in America was about 35%.
Right.
And the Yankees, we called them, when their factories closed down and they didn't have any jobs, they would quite often come down here in the wintertime just to get away from the cold weather. And sometimes there would be men and their families, sometimes just men looking for any kind of work. And Plains happens to be on the main railroad and highway route from Savannah to Columbus and then to Montgomery, Alabama, and eventually to the West Coast. So US 280 and the Seaboard Airline Railroad were both right in front of our house, just 50 feet away from our front door. So we would see every day hundreds of hobos going by our house. And some of them would be walking in the road, some of them would be riding in empty boxcars on the railroad. And the railroad officials would permit the hobos to ride in empty boxcars without trying to arrest them for trespassing, just to be helpful during those times. Everybody tried to help each other. And we would have come to our front door, or back door as a matter of fact, several hobos every day that would be asking just for something to eat or a drink of water or maybe a glass of iced tea or something like that. And my mother was always very generous to them. One day, she was talking to one of her neighbors about a half a mile east of Plains, and Miss Betty Bacon, and she was also a registered nurse, and she said, you know, I'm glad those hobos never stop at my house. And Mama said, well, they stop at my house every day, several of them, and I don't know why. So the next day, she had a very nice hobo sitting on the steps drinking iced tea with her. And she said, look, I want to ask you a question. Why do all the hobos come to my house and they don't go to Miss Bacon's house further up the road? He said, well, Miss Lee, and I hate to say this, but we've marked the mailboxes to show which families are generous and which ones aren't. And yours is marked to show that you'll help anybody that comes by. So after he left, Mom and I went out and looked at the mailbox post, as a matter of fact, and there were scratch marks on there that indicated that Mama was a good touch for hobos to get something to eat.
Oh, that's great. Speaking of your mama, can you tell me what you admired most about Miss Lee and then your dad?
Well, my mother was a registered nurse, and when she was in her younger days, when I was a very tiny baby, she and Daddy both needed all the income they could get. Mm-hmm. So Mother worked at Wise Sanitarium, which was a real fine hospital in Plains at that time. And she would be paid $4 for 12 hours duty. And the Wise brothers who owned the hospital would pay her a regular salary. Mm-hmm. She worked in the operating room as an assistant to Dr. Sam Wise. And then later when Daddy got a little bit more affluent, instead of working in a hospital, Mother worked around Archery and on what we call private duty. Mm-hmm. And she had to put in 20 hours a day, which was a standard time for a nurse that went into a home to nurse a sick person in the house. They didn't go to the hospital unless they had to. And she was paid $6 a day for 20 hours of duty. So when Mother was on private duty, we would not see her at all, because she would get home at 10 o'clock at night and she would change her uniform and wash her clothes and take a shower bath and write instructions for me and my sisters what to do the next day, like sweep the yards and bring in stove wood and so forth. And then she would go back on duty at 2 o'clock in the morning while we were all asleep. So Mother was very intimately committed to the black community in Archery. And they didn't have any money to pay her her $6 cash. So they would pay her, with eggs and with hickory nuts and with light wood to start fires and maybe if they had an extra pig or something like that. They tried very much to pay her, but she didn't care if they paid her or not. So I learned from Mama, really to be concerned about poor people around us and not to pay. Mama paid no attention to the official segregation rules and regulations under which all of us lived. She treated African American people the same way she did white folks, and she could get away with it because she was part of the medical community. Right. Daddy, on the other hand, was I would say, like everybody else around Plains, was a segregationist. He believed in strict separation of black and white people, but he treated the black people, with great integrity and honesty, and we had a long line of people always that wanted to work on Daddy's farm because they knew he treated them right and so forth. Anyway, but as I mentioned earlier, Daddy was a deacon in the church. He taught Sunday school every Sunday morning. And Daddy, I was the only boy then. My brother Billy was not born until I was 13 years old, so I had two sisters, and I was the oldest only son. So Daddy took me under his wing he taught me how to shoot a shotgun and how to catch a fish. And sometimes Daddy would go off with a group of 4 or 5 other men to Florida or to what they call Twin Lakes or down to the Okefenokee Swamp. And I would be the only little boy along. I'd be 8 or 10 years old. Right. And Daddy would take me as kind of a pet, and the other men put up with me because of that. So my daddy really introduced me to the outdoors and to sports. Daddy was an avid and very aggressive and very competent tennis player. So within a week after we bought the farm out there, when I was 4 years old, Daddy had a tennis court built. So he taught me how to play tennis. And when I got in high school, nobody could beat me. In fact, I could play the boys for America, so I could beat all of them as well. I was really an expert tennis player. I never beat my daddy, and he never let me win a set either. But so he taught me about sports and outdoors and how to be a Christian and
that's great.
How to be a good son and a hard worker.
Good. Speaking of your sisters and your brother, was there ever a sense of competitiveness amongst you growing up? If there was that just something that you did naturally, or was it encouraged?
Well, my sisters never worked in the field, and I wanted to work in the field. And my daddy expected it, but they would help mother around the house. And when mother was on duty, they helped the African American women that came in to take care of the house and to cook meals for us. So Ruth and Gloria, my two sisters, learned how to do housework, and of course when they got in high school, they took home economics and learned the same things. But we were never competitive. They didn't play sports, they didn't go fishing, they didn't go hunting, they didn't work in the field. So we had almost completely different lives. Gloria, who was 2 years younger than I was bigger than I was. I was kind of a runt when I grew up. And so Gloria and I had some physical competitions on occasion. I remember once she hit me pretty hard, and then when she turned away and started walking off, I shot her in the rear end with a BB gun. And she managed to cry off and on until she saw Daddy coming down the road. Then she burst into horrible tears. So that was one of the whippings I got from my father, because I shot my sister in the rear end with a BB gun, and I deserved it. But so Daddy was very strict disciplinarian, and I tried to mind my father in every way I could. I was in awe of him. I was with him a lot. I never thought about questioning his authority. Gloria, on the other hand, when she got up old enough to have dates and so forth, she had a mind of her own, and sometimes she would defy my father when he told her to do something that she didn't want to do. And Mama had to be kind of the referee between the children and Daddy. But in spite of all that, it was a very close-knit family, because we lived by ourselves and we depended on each other.
Right. Speaking of children, I know you have a lot of grandchildren. What's your favorite way to spend time with them? And realizing that they're all different, they all have different interests and everything, and they're all different ages. But tell me a little bit about your grandchildren and what you like to do with them.
Well, what we prefer most of all is to have our grandchildren come down and visit us in Plains. And we can take them we got 4 fish ponds, and we can introduce them to outdoor country life. And we still have the farms that we own, since ancient times. So we introduce them to farm life and to the outdoors. And and take them fishing and hunting when they want to go. That's my favorite thing. But we have about 20 of our family members now who live in and around Atlanta. And since we're up there at least one full week a month, and often more than that, I teach at Emory University, and we run the Carter Center up there. Then we try to get together at least one night, a whole family, all 22 of us, just to sit around a table at the Carter Center and talk to each other and get to know each other. And we have other grandchildren and their children now who live in Washington and in Los Angeles and also in Las Vegas. So Rosa and I are very eager to keep our family together. So every year now, for more than 20 years, the week after Christmas, we take all of our family off on a Christmas vacation. And this Christmas vacation, there were 38 of us.
Wow.
That's children and their spouses, grandchildren. We have 12 grandchildren. Some of our grandchildren have our great-grandchildren. We have 9 of those. And so it amounts up to 38 people, counting me and Rosen. So we go to a very interesting and enjoyable place every Christmas vacation, sometimes to Colorado or Utah skiing, sometimes on Caribbean cruises. We've been to Mexico 3 times. We've been to Key West. We've been to Disney World twice. We've been to Dominican Republic. We've been to Panama 3 times. So we try to go to a very interesting place. And Rose and I save up our money every year and pay all the expenses.
Wow.
So we have 100% attendance.
Yeah, I imagine
and so
you do.
it gives our children and grandchildren that live in different places a chance to get to know each other for a full week. So cousins get to know cousins and so forth.
That's great. That's great. Now, this is a question about you and Rosalind.
Uh-oh.
Now, you've been married for a lot of years, and I don't remember exactly how many. You'll tell me, I'm sure. And other than just loving each other the way you do, what's the one thing that you feel has contributed to your long and happy marriage?
Well, we'll soon be married 68 years. And we've had ups and downs. We've had good life. We've had exciting, challenging, unpredictable, adventurous life. We do a lot of things, and I think one of the the two things we've learned early on that I believe saved our marriage during those troubled times was we give each other plenty of space. I don't interfere with what Rosa wants to do on her own. She doesn't interfere with what I do on my own. We help each other when we're asked to help each other. And we try not to ever go to sleep at night without reconciling any sort of arguments we have. And we kind of make that as a religious conviction.
That's correct.
We read the Bible the last thing at night before we go to sleep, usually in Spanish, just to practice our Spanish. So that's one thing. And the other thing I'd say is we wrote a book about it. It's called Sharing Good Times. If either one of us has a hobby in which we're interested, then the other one tries to learn to like that hobby and participate. For instance, we both learned how to ski when we were quite old. I was 62 and Rosa was 59 the first time we did downhill skiing, and we've done it ever since. Rosa took up tennis playing just to play with me. We jogged together till I was 80 years old. And we are avid bird watchers too, so we try to find things to do together.
That's great. That's great. Turning to your years as president, what advice would you give young people today that would aspire to be president?
Well, I think the most important thing is whether you're going to be a mayor or county commissioner or be on a school board or be a state representative or be governor or be president or whatever. If you want to hold public office, I think the best thing to do is to get interested in as many things around your community as possible. Get to know why they're different people, not just close yourself up into a telephone booth with your own family and the ones you have to know, to reach out in some ways. And that is a good way not only to be prepared to ask them later on to vote for you or to support you for political office, but also to stretch your heart, stretch your mind, and that you get acquainted with issues so that when you have to ask questions during a campaign, you can do that. I was lucky enough to come home from the Navy. I was a full-time farmer for 17 years, but I was on the county school board. I was chairman of the county school board. I was a Boy Scout master. I was a deacon in the church. I was in the Lions Club, and I got to be the head of the Lions Club, the president, and I got to be district governor. I had 56 Lions Club in my district, and there were 208 in Georgia. I was chairman of all of those.
Goodness.
So by the time I got ready to run for governor, I had friends all over the state. So I think the main thing is just to look at a broad possible viewpoint of the community around you and let your environment be involved with other people.
Right, being involved and seeking out and making friends, doing things. That's good advice. I can't leave here today without asking you to give me your fondest memory of my favorite Carter, Billy.
All right. Well, Billy was an intimate friend of mine. You know, as I said, he was 13 years younger than I. So when I went off to college, Billy was only 3 years old. And then I went on to the Navy, and it was 11 years after that I came home. And so I hardly knew Billy when he was in his teenage years, when he married you and so forth, and began to have a family. But then he was in the U.S. Marine Corps, as you know, and he had various jobs. And when I began to expand the Carter's Warehouse and needed a partner, then I induced Billy, it was the best thing I ever did, to come home and join me as partner in running the Carter's Warehouse. And we didn't have any idea then that I would be going off to be governor and president, but as I did, he took over. So I think the times that Billy and I worked, sometimes 24 hours without ever going to bed, you know, ginning cotton, buying peanuts, drying peanuts, harvesting peanuts, running the farm. Those kind of shared responsibilities were all very good. I think the most vivid memories I have is when I was running for president, and Billy and I used to play softball together. And he was pitcher on one team, and I was pitcher on the other. And during that summer of 1976, we had more spectators come to watch us than to watch the Atlanta Braves. The Atlanta Braves weren't doing very good
Right.
that summer. So Billy and I had some competition, but
Right.
but Billy had a hot temper sometimes, and sometimes I did, but we always managed to reconcile our differences harmoniously. And another thing is, I got to work early every morning, about 6 o'clock, at the warehouse, just to get ready for the day's work and accommodate early coming customers. Billy was there an hour and a half before I was, and by the time I got there, he had read 5 newspapers,
Right.
and he knew all the news, and he was an expert on details. In fact, Billy used to make a lot of money betting people on things concerning baseball statistics and history, and he was the best educated, I think, in our family. And my mama always said that Billy was the most intelligent person in the family.
I'll have to tell you that I have right now in a top drawer at my home a check from you to Billy for $100, and down at the bottom it says bad bet.
Oh.
Bad bet. It was never cash, but evidently you guys bet on a game or something, and you lost.
I should have known better than to bet with Billy.
We kept that check.
Because he would study the statistics, and if he would get some weird statistic, and then we had a conversation, and Billy would quote that statistic, and everybody around him would say, "That is absolutely wrong." And eventually, he would talk us into betting with him, and he knew he was right.
He knew he was right the whole time, and he was going to win.
He was also a good poker player, I might say.
I know that you have worked with Habitat for Humanity for 30 years
30
now.
years.
We just finished up the 30th Jimmy and Rosalind Carter weekend, and I know that you enjoy the work, and it's one way of giving back and helping. Can you recall, I know you've been to many countries and lots of places in the United States. Can you recall one favorite project within those 30 years?
Well, that would be hard to say. You know, we work a full week every year, and we go back and forth between foreign countries and the United States. I would think the most memorable was probably in the Philippines. That was our biggest project. We had 14,000 volunteers who joined us. About 7,000 from the Philippines and 7,000 came from different countries, including the United States and all over Asia. And we built 293 homes in 5 days.
Right.
They were small houses. And what made it memorable was the tiny house on which Rose and I built, worked along with volunteers and the family that was going to live in it. We had 4 presidents come, and 3 other presidents come and join me in building the house.
Right.
Most of them didn't work but a half an hour, but they got the picture on the television. And the woman that moved in that house was unforgettable, because she and her 3 daughters had been living in an abandoned septic tank.
Ooh.
Every night they went down into a septic tank and covered it up with plastic, and that's where they slept every night. So to get a little small house that was about 200 square feet was just like heaven for her.
Oh, wow.
And when we always gave out a Bible that I signed and the keys to the house, I remember she cried and Rosa and I cried. Everybody around, all the work crew wept for joy to see her have such a better place to live.
I know it. It's a wonderful organization, and you can't go to a dedication without the tears flowing.
That's
I know
true.
from first experience myself. Can you tell me what you were thinking when you walked down Pennsylvania Avenue the day of the inauguration?
Well, that was an enormous surprise to everybody around the world. Presidents had not done that. As you know, they always got in a big limousine and drove down and waved out.
Right.
Mainly with their windows rolled up in an armor protective car. So that nobody would shoot them through the window. And we had been through a great traumatic experience in this country in the preceding years. John Kennedy, the president, had died, been assassinated. His brother Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. We had been to the Vietnam War. That was a divisive thing in our country, and so forth. I need not go down into details. But I wanted to heal the relationship between the government and the people. So secretly, 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, I decided to do that. I didn't tell anybody, except the last minute I told the Secret Service that we were going to get out of the limousine at the National Capitol, where I made my inaugural speech, and walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. So Rose and I and our family walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, and there was a warm feeling between us and the surrounding crowds who were amazed, but very emotional. A lot of people wept, crying, just to see our president exposing himself to them and trusting them. So that was, my feelings were one of thanksgiving that my secret had been kept, and secondly, for the reception that we got from the surrounding crowds that were so grateful that we did it.
Yeah, no, that was a wonderful time. Now, can you tell me what your proudest moment was as president?
Well, obviously, I was proud when I was inaugurated as a president of a great nation like this. And I stayed proud until we started walking into the White House. And we had been in a kind of a solar-heated room that Georgia Tech designed that didn't work. And we froze to death while the parade went by for a long 2 hours. We were all shaking and about to freeze. And we started walking from there to the White House, which is only about 100 yards away. And my press secretary, Jody Powell, said, "Nobody speaks to the press." And my mama was with her. She said, "Jody, you can go to hell. I'll speak to whom I please." So immediately all the news reporters got around my mother. And they said, "Miss Lillian, aren't you proud of your son?" Yeah. And I was waiting for her to say it about her son being president. She said, "Which one?" And I never will forget that. It kind of made me realize that I was still just a common, ordinary citizen, like my brother Billy was, other son. But I think as far as the achievements in the White House, I'm sure that at the top of anybody's list would be the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, because they had been at war 4 times during the 25 years before I became president. And that was now 35 years ago almost. And not a single word in the peace treaty has ever been violated by Egypt or Israel, despite all the problems in the Middle East.
Right. Yes, we all remember that. That was wonderful. This has been a good visit today. I've enjoyed it so much.
I have too.
Can you think of anything else that you would like to add?
Well, the only thing I'd like to add is what we've done since the White House years in Plains. Plains is a part of the official part of the Park Service. It's a National Historic Site.
Right.
And we have, as I may have mentioned earlier, the only official school building here in Plains.
Right.
And we also have preserved Plains just the way it was during the Great Depression years, as far as appearance is concerned. We have a very good historic committee here that has to approve any change in the appearance of Plains. And they're Plains people. We make our own decisions, but we try to keep it looking the way it was. And we try to be the most hospitable little town in America. And when everybody comes to Plains, we try to make them feel at home. And we have a lot to see here in Plains, because the boyhood home where I grew up in Archery is also part of the Park Service. So people can go out there and see how a future president lived when he was a little boy and when he was a teenage son. And so Plains is a wonderful site for visiting. And I'd like to invite everybody that watches this program to come to Plains and just see what we have here.
Yeah, we'd love to have anybody we can.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Sybil.